Okay, everyone, welcome to our event. This is actually part three of a three-part series with Intel and the manufacturing organization behind there at Intel that is presenting opportunities and also their employees to share their experiences and also insight into what it's like to work at Intel. This will be a great opportunity for you to ask questions, for you to network, for you to get to know Intel better and potentially land an interview and a job opportunity having attended this event. So what I like to do as we get started is we're going to talk a little bit about Intel, of course. We're going to talk all about Intel, of course, but I like to go through the agenda for the evening. But first things first, this event is actually featuring the Assembly Test Technology Development and Components Research organization within Intel. So you'll get a little bit more insight into a different team than the previous couple of events that we've had in this three-part series. Okay, so let's go over the agenda for this evening's event so that we can set some expectations, and then we will go ahead and jump right into it. So quickly, I'm going to give you guys a welcome, quick 2 or 3 minutes about myself, about HBCU Connect, and our partnership with Intel. Then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Dr. Osborne A. Martin III, the principal engineer at Intel. After Dr. Martin finishes up his keynote, then we will go into a panel discussion where I will introduce 3 additional team members from Intel that I like to introduce one by one so that you guys can get to know who they are, a little bit about their background and experience so that you have some context. So when we get into that panel discussion and live Q&A, you guys can ask some really good questions to the different members of the team so that they know, or so that you know more about Intel and more about the organization that they represent. So we'll introduce each panelist, we'll jump into the panel discussion, we'll have a live Q&A. Like I said, if we have time, I'll allow some of you all to ask questions live with your audio and video. And then we will go into a thank you and next steps and talk about, how you can potentially land an interview with Intel. Okay, so a little bit about HBCU Connect, a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Will Moss. I'm the CEO of HBCU Connect. We've been around since 1999, serving the needs of students and graduates primarily from HBCUs. However, we've expanded, since the beginning, and we also have rolled out a warm welcome to our Latinx candidates as well, as we try to present great opportunities from different companies, different corporations, and present those opportunities to you all as candidates to stay connected. So we are really happy to have you here this evening. I'm very proud of our relationship with Intel, which we've done already 4 events virtually with Intel this year. But prior to doing these virtual events, prior to COVID-19, we used to host these events physically in different locations all over the country, where we would invite in, members of HBCU Connect and even members beyond that are not currently a part of our network. We would invite you all into our network to attend our events in different parts of the country, and then bring in different companies to talk about their opportunities so that you could get to know those companies better in a physical environment where you could not only, learn about the company, see a presentation, understand the backgrounds of the different participants and panelists, but then also network with those folks physically. So unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we're not able to do that physically, but kudos to Intel because they are still dedicated to recruiting diverse talent. So we're hosting this event virtually. But what I would like to encourage you to do as candidates and interested members of our audience is ask questions in the chat, introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn profile, not only to network with each other, but also to network with the Intel folks that are here to meet you and to learn more about you as well. And that'll happen additionally post-event. All right, so this is a great opportunity, from that series of events that we hosted previous to COVID-19, lots of people got hired and now work at Intel from our events with Intel previously. And now our hope and expectation is that some of you will also have the opportunity to interview and potentially be hired to work for great careers at Intel. So with that being said, Welcome everyone, and let me introduce our keynote speaker, who is Dr. Osborne Martin, Principal Engineer and Director of Packaging Metrology in the Assembly Test Technology Development Organization. So Dr. Osborne, if you're ready.
Thank you. Of course, I can't find the mute button. So thank you for the introduction. We can go to the next slide. I really, I miss the face-to-face. I miss seeing the faces and feeling the energy in the room. So if you have chat comments, I'm going to try to watch the chat. I've got 3 screens, so if you see my head going back and forth, I'm not having a seizure. I'm trying to keep track of a few different things here. So we'll start with a little bit about me. So I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. If you're not familiar with that part of the world, it's most easily and readily known for Fort Bragg Air Force Base or Fort Bragg Army Base, home of the 82nd Airborne. Pope Air Force Base was also there. It shut down 10, 15 years ago or so. So it's pretty much a military town. My dad was a military guy, but I wasn't a military brat. So he was done by the time I came along. And we just kind of grew up in that shadow of the military base. I'm a graduate of E.E. Smith Senior High School. It is one of the few remaining primarily African-American schools in North Carolina. Dudley is another one, Durham Hillside maybe another, Grimsley I believe is another. So there are a few floating around. So I am a proud graduate of that. I'd say that to say that you don't need a private education or a private school. You can come through your public school systems and get it done. I'm also a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride. I see a few of those jumping online. I appreciate that. And I'll say I did learn quite a bit in North Carolina A&T. It is a great place to practice. It is a great place to learn, and a great place to find your sense of self. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that if questions come up around that as we move along. For master's and PhD, I went to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. If you don't recognize the green one down there, that is not Chapel Hill, that is UNC at Charlotte, the 49ers. I kind of stumbled into a world-class graduate program down there that I didn't know existed. My original intent was to go to either Michigan State or University of Florida, and I stumbled into University of North Carolina at Charlotte with some of the smartest people I've ever run into in my life. In the rest of the picture, you see my family. This is my wife, Paula, and my daughter, Zora. And a couple of pictures from the last year as we've tried to navigate COVID. You see our masks. This top right one is a picture in Sedona where we were out hiking on our own as much as we could, trying to stay clear of everyone else. And the last one in the bottom right is a picture at the Grand Canyon that just came to be. It was a day trip. We were driving around and we just kept driving. So a 15-minute drive turned into about a 6-hour drive that day. We were not prepared for the cold weather, which is why we kind of looked like vagabonds in that picture. In my pastime, I do 2 things primarily when I'm not, with my family and taking care and loving them. I'm an avid reader. I like to read self-help books. I like to read technical types of books. I'm a bit of a software guy, at least I used to be when I had that kind of time. And then the one thing I do consistently is play pool. So I love playing billiards, pool, if you will. 10 ball is my favorite game these days. I also play one pocket. So if I'm in town and you're lucky to get a game, we can always get a game. We'll jump to the next one. So a little bit about my career journey. Coming out of North Carolina A&T in 1995, I'll do the math for you. I'm currently 50 years old. The job market was pretty tough. I got into North Carolina A&T on an academic scholarship through a NASA program at the time, SPTD Scholars, whatever it was, the Scholars Program for NASA. And some of my on-campus research focused on things like carbon fiber fabrication for panels on the space shuttle. Kind of interesting work in the time. Didn't really lead to an employment opportunity. So upon graduation, I ended up teaching high school. I taught high school in Robeson County in North Carolina, a kind of small district, primarily Native Americans. Lumbee Indian is big part of the population down in that region at Lumberton High School. Absolutely loved it. Had a great time teaching math, algebra 2 and geometry to juniors and seniors. So these were people who were not particularly interested in learning math, but we had a great time learning together once I convinced them I wasn't trying to trick them or somehow confuse them with the math that we were learning. The challenge with high school for me is I stayed in trouble more so than the kids, mostly because some kids did not wish to be there. They didn't want to go to school, but for whatever reason, they kept them in the program. So I got to spend a lot of quality time with my principal and administrators at that time. Pay was also a challenge, and it kind of motivated me to go to grad school. And that's when I moved over into University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And Caterpillar was a strong sponsor for my graduate works at that time in my master's programs. They also sponsored me in my PhD work a little bit, but I did 2 internships with Caterpillar, and then I took a job with them just before I finished my PhD, which I would not advise anyone to do. It is very tough to work and try to write your dissertation at the same time. But I thought it was a good move for me because the market was looking to turn south once again, and I didn't want to find myself looking for a job when I had one on the table. Around 2004, Intel came calling. They came calling through a contact I got at school. So one of my classmates at school was working for Intel and recruited me to come out to Arizona and join the team that he was on. And I've been here ever since, 17 years later. All of them have been within the Assembly Test Technology Development Organization in one capacity or another. And I've moved through what really are 2 different groups. The name has changed in the middle from DETD to SPTD. These are the group or the group that does the packaging, development, and process transfer into our high volume manufacturing sites in the Asian Pacific Rim. So we'll go to the next slide. So a little bit about Intel. And Intel as a company, as an ethical company, as just a good company, a great company to work for. Looks like some of my fonts or text is missing. The top left one is really about environmental sustainability and the work that Intel does to ensure that we are socially and really environmentally responsible citizens as corporate citizens. So we do a lot in terms of water reclamation. Our manufacturing processes do take a lot of water, and we reclaim and reuse a lot of that as much as we can. We have solar panels in the desert. We have lots of sunshine, and we use a lot of solar energy on tops of our parking structures to try to minimize our footprint in that way. Social impact, Intel is a very great company in terms of matching dollars and hours that you use volunteering for any cause that you find suitable. They have their own corporate objectives as well, but anything that is a kind of a recognized, was it 501(c)(3) is one that Intel can support as well. The left talks about kind of inclusion, diversity and inclusion. I've been lucky enough to work on a number of those projects over the last 5 or 6 years as we've improved a lot of our challenges and metrics as it relates to diversity throughout the entire corporate employee base inside of Intel. So we've seen significant and continued and sustained progress in terms of the percentage of underrepresented minorities inside the company. And I think I'm most proud of our transparency as it relates to where our numbers are today and where they have been in the past. So if you're interested in that, there is a diversity and inclusion site that is open to everyone. Anyone can go see it, and you can see how our company has been performing year over year, and where we've made great strides and maybe where we've lost a step or two and we need to kind of pick up the pace again. Next slide. All right, Intel, big company, very big company. Intel delivers on end-to-end solutions. So these are few of the things that you may have heard and Intel is best known for. Client computing, when you think about laptops, tablets, we did some work in the cell phone space throughout the years. Internet of Things, those computers, those sensors, those devices that recognize your presence, that send you information based on your location and your own profile are also things that we are very involved in and have huge impact there. Data centers, we talk about things like Amazon Web Services, cloud service providers. We're heavy in those spaces as well with custom solutions. New technologies, drone technologies. We have a great drone demonstration team. They've seen them in a number of events. I know they've been in a few of the Olympic events and some of the other high profile professional sporting events as well. Programmable solutions, these are like field programmable gate arrays. Security as it relates to the security of our devices and protecting your information while using an Intel device, and then the memory solution. So all these spaces are places inside of the company where we have active business units where we're working diligently to make things better and better for everyone that uses our technology. So we'll jump to the next one, and we'll talk a little bit about Intel as an, excuse me, as an integrated device manufacturer. IDM 2.0 is something that has been bantered about and really championed by our new CEO, Pat Gelsinger. And what it really means is that we have the ability to design, build, deliver end-to-end solutions. So everything from the initial conceptualization of a piece of silicon, what it should do, how it should work, to the manufacturing of that piece of hardware, the assembly of that hardware, and delivery to end customers, all sits inside of one company. That's Intel. Intel is one of the few companies on the planet that can say this, and it provides us great benefits, and it provides our employees, like myself, great opportunities. So if there's an interest you have, a skill set that you'd like to either maximize, utilize, or one that you'd like to grow and develop, there's a spot in Intel where we're probably doing that work. So internally, those channels are there. Of course, like anything else, you have to find them, navigate them so that you can successfully transition from one to the next. But it's been a great place for me as my career has grown and my opportunities to learn new things have continued to come and help me develop as a professional. All right, where are we? So here's kind of a map. On the left side, you'll see in the United States, there are 2 yellow dots. The bottom one is the Arizona site. There are actually two campuses in Arizona. One is in Ocotillo. That site is where we manufacture our wafers. These are high volume revenue manufacturing silicon sites. There's also a site in Chandler. This is where most of the assembly test and packaging technology development work happens. And then that's the teams are actually located there that do that technology transfer out to the Asian Pacific Rim, where you'll see the sites that are ATM. These are our assembly sites and test sites. And this is where we will do the assembly and test before we ship to our revenue producing partners, such as Dell and Lenovo and any others that are actually delivering devices to customers. The yellow dot in the top left in the United States is our Oregon site. So this is where we do all of our leading cutting edge technology development, manufacturing for silicon, next process node, for wafer manufacturing. So there are a number of campuses up there. And there's also a couple of campuses. There's one in Costa Rica, and there's some other smaller sites scattered around the United States. But these are our major sites, and specifically the assembly test technology development sites and partners around the world. So here's a little more about the factories, some pictures of the factories and a little bit about what they do at the Oregon site. Probe factory. So for the testing part of what we do, when we actually build our silicon, we test it as well to make sure that it's functional and that they are of good quality before we even go through the packaging assembly step. The development, manufacture of those probes and the systems that do the test happens internally as well. So that probe factory sits in Oregon at a factory called Rondler Acres, pardon me. We also do board development. So as we build packaging, as we build products that we sell to customers around the world, we test them for their integration into printed circuit boards. So we will help a Dell, if you will, or anyone else that needs to take our product and put it onto a circuit board to make sure that that assembly process is yielding high results of high quality and that they don't have many defective parts that come out of the back end of their line. The Aloha campus does the die sort and the die prep. This is, again, silicon processing. And again, and the effort there is to make sure that every piece of silicon that leaves is good. Known good die is a very important part of our assembly process, and it ensures that we get high yield and high return on our investments as we ship them out to our customers around the world. The Chandler site on the bottom right shows a couple of different factories. The one at the very bottom is the newest factory, CH8. It is where much of the pathfinding work, as well as the technology development work and the technology transfer for substrates happens at this particular site. Once that work is in a position and gets to a maturity for transfer, the engineering teams from this group, this SPTD, Substrate Packaging Technology Development, they will partner with our suppliers around the world in the Asian Pacific Rim. Typically, they're in Japan, Taiwan, and China, as they ramp up their factories to produce high volumes of substrates for the assembly processes that happen in Malaysia. So a little bit about the employee base. So it's about 3,000 employees. This number feels a little low to me. The most recent numbers I've seen for our groups are a little larger than that, maybe 500 to 1,000 more. 480 or so PhDs, 750 or so master's degree students. We do have quite a number of bachelors as well, and we do have some folks without 4-year degrees. Now, the types of jobs and the roles that the individuals play as you enter the company are quite often dictated by your level of education and your level of experience. So on our factory floors, for example, you'll find a lot of individuals who have associate's degrees, or maybe who've come through a military type of background, or they've had experience in other semiconductor or clean room types of workspaces. So they're supporting and primarily engaged in our 24/7 operational support and quality controls there. So we do have some folks that will be on the panel that can talk about that, and they can talk about that. For much of the pathfinding work, that's where you'll see the PhDs come into play. There are also a number of engineering labs that are doing foundational and really high-level engineering work to understand how the pieces, how the material properties, how the manufacturing process steps interact to ensure that we have good quality products that can last for the expected duration of their use. Go to the next slide. So here we have just a list of the organizations on the left. The names will give you a little bit of a hint into what they do. There are a couple of words as well to give you some idea of the types of roles and responsibilities that exist there. The two at the bottom, maybe I'll talk about those a little bit. The core competency team, lots of modeling. So as we have improved computer power and computing power, we like to maximize that as much as we can to get us a bit of a head start. So it helps us understand how materials and how those processes that are imparted on the materials interact, so that we can move in the way that is best for our reliability at the end of our process flow. We also have validation labs. So the computer will give us a North Star, if you will, and our validation labs give us the empirical data that says, yes, the modeling and the direction in which it's telling us to go is confirmed and validated by empirical data. Test integration. This is a group of, I call them our project managers. These are individuals with typically engineering degrees. They could be chemical, electrical, material scientists, any number of engineering disciplines, but they have experience with our manufacturing processes, our architecture designs, and how those materials interact with those processes, and work through the challenges we see as new architectures, new products are going through their development phases. So their job, their role is to really pull all the pieces of the organization together to keep those programs on track so that we hit the schedules that we need. Disciplines. What I've listed here are all of the typical engineering disciplines you'll see. I may have missed a few. We do have industrial engineers, for example, people who are really responsible for the efficiencies of how material moves through our factories and the material flows, the time it takes to get from one end of the line to the next. People who in that space also work with our finance teams as they do predictive models for cost. What does it cost for us to make something? And make sure that we are all, working within the allocated funds that are there. Planning organizations, many various disciplines come to bear in the work that happens on the Chandler sites and within assembly test technology development. A few of the skills, machine learning, um, metrology, optics is the world that I live in most of the time. Um, Software systems, whether it's C Sharp, C++, Linux, all of these things are tools that we need and need more of. And we also need the most recent ones, right? So we do love to have recent college graduates and people who have experiences that we just don't have internally. So that diversity of thought, bringing new tools that we are not aware of or we haven't had exposure to, and helping us learn how to apply them to our problems is always a welcome and a needed thing. So that's why we like to keep the pipeline of incoming new hires fresh. I believe this is my last slide. Yeah, that's my last slide. So if you have any questions, I was trying to watch the chat. I didn't see anything that caught my eye, but I'll take any questions you may have.
I'd love to follow up with a couple of questions just to get to know you better and sort of a day in the life for you. But let me start off with this one that I think a lot of our candidates will relate to. So, and that is, do you feel that your HBCU education and experience having gone to North Carolina A&T helped to prepare you for what you do now at Intel?
Yes, I'll smile a little bit because I do go back to North Carolina A&T as often as I can to try and help with recruiting, and as well as just working with I came out of the mechanical engineering department. Many of those have moved on, but Dr. Robin Koger, I still talk with her and some of her people as often as I can. The education there, the foundational work there, just the basics, all of that, it's top notch. I haven't run across anyone with a better foundation based on their undergraduate work, regardless of which university they've come out of. Intel is a West Coast company, right? So their roots are Stanford. So you throw a rock and you hit somebody that graduated from Stanford.
Okay.
But there's never been a place or a time where my background or my foundational skills were subpar to anyone else. I believe it also helped just in the opportunity to deal and work with people that I see every day. So the professors, for example, at North Carolina A&T when I was there, and it looks to be the same as I've been kind of 2-3 years ago, they're international. So when you go into a corporate environment, you're going to run into many international professionals. Many of them will be your managers, the leaders of the company, and just being able to comfortably present yourself, but also to work with them and sometimes even to understand them, right? And for you to be understood. So I think it's easy for us as folks from the South or from, a minority background to say, hey, I can't understand what Dr. such and such is saying. Their accent is too strong. We have to also be mindful that they have a similar experience with us.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we are clear in how we speak. We don't use slang or colloquialisms that are just unclear to them. As an example, I did it with my boss 2 weeks ago. We were exchanging a instant message through our corporate network, and he asked me a question, and I said 10-4. It took him about 10 minutes, and he's like, I don't know what 10-4 means. So simple things like that just are just help you be mindful of that and help you make that transition, I think, into the corporate world where you'll see many people from many different backgrounds. And we just can't assume that all of those instinctual or just common slang or just common words are really well understood by those who have not experienced them.
So how did you get your foot in the door at Intel?
The foot in the door at Intel came through a recommendation from someone who was at Intel. So I went, my graduate programs at North Carolina Charlotte, and one of my classmates actually took a job at Intel probably 2 or 3 years before I graduated. And about 3 years after I started with Caterpillar, he just reached out. He said, hey, we're going through a hiring spree right now. We've got some interesting projects. I think they line up well what you do, and come take a look. So I was lucky in that sense, that I did have someone that I knew inside of the company, that I trusted inside of the company, which also helps, right? So I trust him enough that he wouldn't tell me to come work in some place that was just a not a good place to work.
Right.
But I did have to go through the normal interviewing processes. He wasn't part of my interviewing panel. He didn't have any feedback or input on that. And the gears of a corporation are slow. I
Right.
interviewed in July, August, and I didn't hear back from Intel until February of the next year.
Okay.
So at that point, I was really like, okay, I guess it didn't happen or whatever.
Right.
And when I'm interviewing and recruiting and doing those things, I try to be a little more hands-on so that they know what's happening in the process. But patience also helps. So that experience, I'll say, as you go through it, be patient and be diligent. So maybe I wasn't aggressive enough checking in. Maybe I would be a little more aggressive about that if I were to do anything differently.
Okay.
But all in all, North Carolina A&T is my foundation, and having someone inside of Intel reach out to me and really bring me into a good space has been a very positive thing for me.
So I've got a couple of questions floating around in my
Sure.
head. One related to relocating from the Southeast to Arizona. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the other one, I want to lead it into what you currently do and then the opportunities on your team. But let's talk about the relocation, because a lot of folks, when we have our events, as obviously folks are African Americans from New York all the way down to Florida, across to Texas, in the Midwest, across to St. Louis, and then there's a void until you hit California, right? So we have events, and that's where most of our folks are, and they don't really have, before the event, they might not have a reason to want to relocate to Arizona, for example. So my question to you is, what was it like for you to relocate? And then once you relocated, how have you sort of set roots there in Arizona?
My relocation experience was maybe closer to someone from the northern part of maybe New York or something. I moved here from Illinois. So I was working in Peoria, Illinois. I moved in March of 2004. And when I left, there was snow on the ground, 3-4 feet high, pushed onto the sides of the road. The airplane landed, it was like 100+ degrees, and I looked like a crazy guy with this big parka coat on, right? So that was my first experience coming into Arizona
Okay.
and really not understanding what a dry heat is. So
Okay.
All that being said, the dry heat, I actually love it now. 100 degrees really isn't that hot. It's actually very comfortable. If it's over 110, we can talk about it being hot. The challenges, I think, are kind of the same that you would run into any place you transition where you're new. Finding someone to cut my hair, right? So that was my wife's kind of mission. What I asked her to do is, can you find me a barber somewhere that can actually cut my hair?
Yep.
Just because I didn't know where to go.
When was it that when you relocated?
We relocated in 2004,
Okay.
and we moved into the Chandler region.
Mhm.
And we ended up she found a place in Tempe. I think it's either called Nappy Cuts or Nappy Roots. I don't remember which one. I don't go there anymore. I go to a place called The Cut. But over the years, I've found more locations. And the employee resource groups inside of Intel, as I got onboarded at Intel and got exposure to those resource groups, were invaluable. Network of Intel African Ancestry is one of our employee resource groups. And that's one of the things where you can ask those types of questions. In your onboarding into the company, there's also a buddy assigned to you. Your buddy is not your manager. There's typically someone on your team who's has some, experience, and someone else you can ask those types of questions to. So it helped to have that kind of network waiting for me to engage with it. That it sped up the transition as well. It took me a little time to find it, but I think over the years since I've come on board, and as a hiring manager now, we've done a lot to make sure that the new hires really get exposed to employee resource groups, make sure they have buddies, people they can ask these types of, really simple questions. Coming from North Carolina, I love Texas Pete hot sauce. I could not get Texas Pete. My dad had to ship it to me for the first 6 years. So those types of things, they've gotten better and better over the years.
Awesome. And so can you talk a little bit about what your current role is and
Sure.
currently what you do? And then let's talk about the opportunities in your team.
So my current role, I have a group of engineers. We're a metrology team. If you don't know what metrology is, it's not the weather, it's actually measurement. So my group is responsible for the equipment, the tools, the techniques, the processes, where we monitor the control, right? How well is a piece of production equipment performing? Is the output from that production equipment, the piece part itself, meeting the target specifications? So my engineers are primarily responsible for those equipment that do that data collection, making sure that tools are healthy, up to production, well maintained, and they will help create recipes as necessary when they are too complicated for the 24/7 support staff we have on the floor. So that's one branch that happens on the Chandler site. I have another group that's really responsible for the external suppliers. So we do this manufacturing in Japan, in Taiwan, in Singapore, and they are external companies, not Intel companies that we partner with. So that group of engineers really works with those suppliers into our assembly sites to make sure the piece parts they send us are meeting all of our quality specs. So they are like the quality inspectors and the quality engineers that ensure the material we're getting, that's the new revenue material that we're producing, is coming in with good quality. When we have excursionary events, they also get involved with that as the error, the understanding what happened and how do we fix it, how do we resolve it, and how we prevent it from continuing to appear in our manufacturing lines. So those are the two big groups that I have. Well,
Awesome.
big scopes. They're not huge groups. My group is about 16 people today.
And do you have any opportunities where you're currently hiring?
I do. I just got approval for 2 headcount. I'm pushing for 4.
Okay.
And there's 2 spaces I'm looking. I have 6 new pieces of metrology equipment landing in the next 16 months. So I'm really looking for bachelor's and mechanical, or bachelor's and master's types of candidates. Engineering discipline for me is not a big issue. I just need people who are really willing to learn and learn the metrology aspects in terms of how we do it, why we do it, and the process flows that we support. I'm also looking for 2 individuals that will work more with the external facing suppliers. And that will mean collaborating with folks in the Japan and Korean time zones. And when travel opens up, there's also kind of a twice a year trip that they'll visit where they'll do supplier visits where they walk their lines and do audits and those types of things.
Awesome. So for everyone that's on, just wanted to make sure to make that call out that Dr. Martin is hiring on his team. So definitely you'll want to make sure we have your resume, and then maybe reach out on LinkedIn and network with Dr. Martin. But Dr. Martin, I want to thank you for being our keynote today. And I'll ask you to hang on for our panel discussion after I introduce our next panelist.
Will do.
Thank you. And Dr. Felix, I see your hand up. So we're going to have a live Q&A once we introduce our panelists and get started with our panel discussion. So if you can just hang on to your questions until we get to that live Q&A, or feel free to drop those questions in the chat. And there are folks from the Intel team that are on standby to answer those questions in the chat. But like I said, we'll have a live Q&A after we get done introducing our panelists and getting to know them a little bit better. All right, so let me go ahead and introduce our first panelist, who is Carmen Coleman, Manufacturing Operations Manager. So Carmen, if you're ready.
Sure. Hello, it's really nice to be here and meet everyone. I'll give a little bit of background of how I made it here to Intel. So my background is a little similar to what Dr. Martin talked about, where I had a friend who actually worked in Oregon, and he recommended Intel. And then from that point, I applied and I started working here. So I started in 2005, and I've had the opportunity to do several different roles. My background is industrial engineering. So I graduated from Northwestern University I have a BS in industrial engineering. And so I did that role, industrial engineering. And then I did some roles in technical program management, manufacturing engineering. So in my career, I've been very fortunate to move around. And that's what I really like about Intel. There's so many different roles that you can do. And that's what I did do. I love Lean Six Sigma. So that is something that I'm certified in, and I get a chance to use those skill sets of efficiency. And so I've been doing that since I've been here. Now I am a manager. And so I manage a team of people. Dr. Martin talked about a factory, CH8, which is one of the newer factories. a substrate factory, that is where I work in. And so I have a team of people who work on the floor and work with the different equipment to make sure we make the schedules that we need to make and our goals during those days. So that's what I do as a manager. And then outside of work, I have a passion to help people know what they're passionate about. So outside of work, outside of Intel, I'm a life coach. And so I get a chance to work with individuals who have a passion and know where they want to go, or help them discover that and help them get there. The good thing about being a manager at Intel, I get a chance to use that same passion and skill sets with my own team. And then I love traveling. So I've been to 5 out of 7 continents. I still have Australia and Antarctica left to go. So I'm looking forward to, at one point, hitting those two continents. So, and that's pretty much my background.
So where are you from originally?
Oh, so I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Actually, if anyone's from Cleveland, I'm from actually Shaker Heights, Ohio.
Okay.
And that's where I grew up.
So are you currently still in Ohio, or did you relocate?
I relocated. So that is a big change. So if any, in Ohio, it's the Midwest, so it's snow and all that fun stuff. So coming from, I just remember I lived in North Carolina for a little bit. Prior to coming to Intel, I worked in North Carolina. And I remember looking at like a news show, and it said, hey, Arizona has 115 degrees. And I was like, what kind of people live out there? Well, I'm one of those people now. And so, yes, it was a transition, but I do like the dry heat, as they say.
So let me ask a question on behalf of the candidates, right? So
Sure.
Let's say I'm going to put my candidate hat on, and I'm curious about the interview process. What was it like for you when you interviewed with Intel?
Mm-hmm. So in my case, I had about 3 or 4 people in the room when I was interviewing, and I had a lot of questions surrounding around like, what did I specifically do? Like, what specifically did I do from a problem solving standpoint? What I specifically do from an analytics standpoint? And examples they were specifically asking was not just as a group, but what did I do? And so I would recommend that for those who are interviewing, make sure you're able to articulate what you specifically did. And so that was what my interview process was like.
And a little bit about your team. What kind of people are on your team, or what types of skills do they have, and do you look for?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Martin had mentioned there was a team of people who work on the factory that have people that may have a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree or be part of the military. And so that's what my team is like. And so a lot of the teammates that I have are people who work for me have either AA degrees. Some of them have master's degrees. Some of them have 4 years degrees. And they basically work and they work on the factory and they help run the tool set.
Awesome. So I noticed you've been at Intel since 2005. Mm-hmm. What is it that keeps you there, and what you like? What do you like most about working for Intel?
I think it's what I alluded to before, where I get a chance to do what I really love doing, like helping people, developing people, and I do that directly in my job. And so, like I mentioned, outside of work, I'm a life coach, but I literally can do what I love to do outside of work, inside of work. And so that's what I really like about Intel. And also, I like the fact that you can try different things. For example, I did, one of the roles I did was industrial engineering. And even though that's my background, when I got into the role, I wasn't overly, I didn't enjoy it as much when I got into the role. But I got there and I said, well, and I did well, but I wanted to try something new. Well, Intel is like, it's a huge place where you have a lot of different opportunities. And I was able to get another role. Even though the role I had wasn't terrible, but it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to do something else and learn more skill sets. So I was able to do that. That's what I like about Intel, the flexibilities, you can do something new and you can do what you really love inside of work.
Awesome. So I want to go back to your undergrad, right? And I asked this question because I like to connect the dots. And I know we probably have a lot of folks that have different types of engineering degrees, and maybe some folks that have industrial engineering degrees. So I'm curious, what led you to choose industrial engineering in the beginning? Oh,
so I think ever since I've been, so I call myself, when I talk to my family, like, what do you do for a living? Sometimes it's hard to explain it. So I always explain, I'm an efficiency expert. I'm an efficiency engineer. So that means, like, no matter where I go, if I'm going, for instance, going to the grocery store, I'm like, how can I get through this area as fast as I can, the most efficiently? And so I've always kind of had that, even when I went to, especially when I go up to like Disney World, I'm like, how can I get through this line? I'm not standing in line for 2 hours. So I've always been the person that's like, how can I do this efficiently? Right. So when I found out the industrial engineers are actually efficiency engineers, I was like, that's the role for me.
Nice.
And so that's why I chose industrial engineering when I was in school.
So another, question is, I know we have a lot of folks that are interested in going into program management, and I know you're an operations manager, but I'm curious as to how your experience as a program manager has helped you in what you do today at Intel.
Yeah, so I like, and I guess I'm going to kind of reference a little bit when I was in college. In college, you do a lot of roles where you're doing projects and you're leading a project, right? And so I learned that a lot when I was in college. And then even outside of work, I do a lot of community service projects and those type of things. So I found like when I was even trying to organize a food pantry, for example, I naturally was picking up these skill sets that I could use at work. So I think when I look at being a program manager, it's looking at, what are the things that I did that I can look at the big picture, assign people who have the right skill sets, and do a schedule so we can make it to the end. That's what program management is. And I realized I was doing it outside of work and inside of work as well.
Awesome. So Carmen, let me thank you for being one of our panelists. And for our candidates, if you have any specific questions for Carmen or for Dr. Martin, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. And then I'll ask you both so far to keep an eye on the chat for any questions you might be able to answer. And then we'll go into our panel discussion after I introduce our next panelist. So,
sounds great. Thanks,
Carmen. All right, so let me introduce our next panelist, who is Jade Lewis, a process and R&D engineer at Intel. So Jade, if you're ready.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Jade Lewis. I graduated from Georgia Tech with a chemical engineering degree in 2019. So after I got my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, I decided I wanted to move to the West Coast. So I started applying to jobs here in Arizona, California. And then, Intel reached out to me and it's like, oh, you want to work in manufacturing? I was like, yes, that's what I do as a chemical engineer. So I started working for substrate packaging and technology development here in Chandler, Arizona. And I actually worked alongside my first job, I used to work alongside with like Carmen's team and other operation managers team, and then their team would contact me for quality escalations, tool problem issues. So that's what I did at my first role at Intel. And then now I currently work as a process and R&D engineer. So I work on just like developing the next generation tools that will have products and the technologies that will send out for that. So I do that now. Outside of school, I like to do recreational sports. So currently I'm doing kickball and indoor and outdoor volleyball. And then I also am getting my master's, which is sponsored by Intel. So I'm getting my material science and engineering degree.
Awesome. Is that like a benefit of working at Intel? Is you can go for your master's and get sponsored, or is that something like a specific program that you're a part of?
Yes. It's definitely a program that we have where they have like tuition reimbursement. So you can get your master's or you could get your PhD, and it's completely paid off as long as your manager approves of it. I decided to do material science and engineering because when I started working in the factory, I realized it's like, oh, a lot of this isn't chemical engineering. A lot of it's more material science and understanding like, why are we having voids in our materials or cracks? And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand the small scale materials. So that's why I went and did my master's, and I'm thankful for that because now I actually understand, the semiconductor processing and everything.
So how did you were you a university hire into Intel?
Yes.
Awesome. And so what was it like when you started in the transition to working at Intel?
So coming in, I'm from Georgia. I think I mentioned that. So I also came from, the Southeast, and then coming over here to like the dry heat. That was definitely a transition, especially because in Georgia, the African-American community is really huge.
Right.
And coming to Arizona, kind of like with Dr. Martin with his haircut, I'm like, oh, where do I buy hair? Where do I go to like the beauty supply stores? So that was kind of like my culture shock. But the hiring process was pretty straightforward. They first started off with a phone interview and then an on-site interview. which was more like behavioral based, and then a little bit of technical skills just to see where you're at on that side. So.
Awesome. And so what is it that you like most so far about working at Intel?
I like the people and the culture. A lot of my friends are actually Intel employees. So you can already tell like the people here are amazing. I do like the fact that, you know, the people, your peers that you work with, as long as you're managers, you're recognized for, you know, the work that you do, no matter how big or how small. And I appreciate that because, you know, sometimes, you know, what we do can like, you know, in other companies, it doesn't get recognized, but here, like, no matter how small of the work you do, you get recognized for it. So that's what I really enjoy.
Awesome. So I know we have a mix of experience for the candidates that are joining us on the call today, but I know there's some folks that are super eager, that are early in career, but they're super eager about opportunities with Intel. So my question to you is, what advice would you give folks that are interested in working at Intel that might be early in career?
My advice is to ensure you have like connections. I mean, you have the panelists here, so we'll be kind of like your first, you know, connections. Because that's how I got this job was, you know, I knew somebody who worked here. You know, I talked to them on LinkedIn, and they kind of helped me as like my foot in the door. So I think connections are definitely a big thing. And then, you know, just keep applying to jobs, multiple jobs, if Intel is the place you want to be.
Awesome, awesome. So if you guys that are with us have any questions specifically for Jade, Jade graduated in 2019 and is now a process R&D engineer at Intel. And remind everyone again what your undergrad degree is in.
My undergrad's in chemical engineering, and then my master's is in material science and engineering.
Awesome. So if anyone has questions for Jade, feel free to drop those in the chat. And then Jade, I'll bring you back for our panel discussion after I introduce our next speaker.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jade. All right, so our next speaker is Sadiq Antwi Bompong, who's also in engineering. And Sadiq, correct me if I'm wrong, you are an engineering manager in the thermal compression bonding module of Intel ATTD.
Yes, that is correct. So hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. So I am originally from Ghana in West Africa. I moved to the US when I was 18 for undergrad at MIT in the material science and engineering department. So got my bachelor's degree there. And after MIT, really was interested in learning more and getting more depth when it comes to material science. So I went on to pursue a PhD at Dartmouth, where I specialized in materials chemistry. So I was in New Hampshire, frigid, cold New Hampshire for 4 years. And after my PhD, I decided to journey west. So I moved to New Mexico. I took an offer at Intel to be a process engineer. So I was a process engineer in the lithography module. I was there for almost 3 years in New Mexico. So the big fab in New Mexico that Intel operates for the chipset production. I was there for about 2 to 3 years. And then I really was curious about the journey of the wafer and life of the wafer after it left the fab. So I moved on. I decided to pivot and get more into the development space. And so I came to Arizona to join the assembly test module so that I could put on my R&D hat, do some development work, very similar to what Jade described in her role. So I did that role for about 3 years. I always describe to people, if you ever do an autopsy or you open up the motherboard or you open up a server product, the capacitors, the resistors, the small components that you see, that is the process that I was leading when I was in that role. So I did that for about 3 years. And I was really curious and wanted to really grow another muscle. I was really interested in management. So I decided to take a leave of absence, an education leave from Intel for a year to pursue my MBA. That's another benefit of Intel. They really will support you with your career as you want to grow in different ways you want to grow. And so I took a year off and I went to Cornell to do a full-time MBA for a year in New York. You can imagine this was last year. So this was in the throes of COVID. So that is a very colorful experience, unfortunately. And then after that, I came back to Intel and I decided to go into management. So I pivoted from doing R&D technology development as an engineer into engineering management, really working with different teams, growing different engineers, and really driving tactical execution of the day-to-day development activities that we do. So right now, I manage a core team of 14 engineers, and my team drives the day-to-day development activities, production, operations, and we sit at the intersection between manufacturing and engineering. And also, interestingly, in my organization, I do run the hiring business process. So I'm the hiring manager for my departments. And so a lot of the advice that you've heard from the panelists, Carmen and Jade and Dr. Martin, are all very much consistent with my experience. Outside of work, I do love to travel. My sister's always teasing me that I'm always on the go. And I just really like to connect with different people and experience different cultures. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the interests of the people on the panel, as well as the attendees today and their experiences and how they would like to connect with Intel.
Awesome. So just a couple of follow-up questions for you. I noticed that you have a bachelor's of science degree in material science. So what made you choose to go into material science?
Yeah, very good question. So in Ghana, we specialize very early in high school. So I was a science student in high school, and I really enjoyed chemistry and physics. And so when I went to college, I really was looking for a program that would hybridize the two interests. And so material science was really the space where I could really combine my passion for chemistry with physics and really try to understand phenomena happening at the material level. And so that's what really informed my decision to do material science. And one of the beauties of material science is it diverges into various subsets. And so you can pursue different careers and really go into depth and also get breadth while you are in that area of study.
It sounds like you were ahead of your time. So my next question is, what is it that you like so far most about working at Intel?
Yeah, to echo Jade's comments, what I love the most about Intel is the people. The people here are incredibly intelligent. They come from different backgrounds. They are all very passionate about technology, and this common passion really comes out, manifests in the products that we make. We have high quality. We always pushing the boundaries when it comes to the new technology that we deliver and the premium value that we give to our customers. And so it's a really great place to really connect with people who are very interested in technology and really looking for ways to advance society with technology. So it's a great place for people who are very curious intellectually about technology and the boundaries of technology, semiconductor. And one of the things that I also like, especially about Intel, is because of the nature of the company, it's a big company, it's been established for a while. There are various roles that you can do. I've been at Intel 7 years and I've been in 3 different roles. And so that's one of the beauties of working at Intel is you really drive your own career and you go where your interests are, and there are many mentors, managers, peers who help shape you along the way.
Awesome, awesome. So Sadiq, let me thank you again for being one of our panelists.
Absolutely.
And with that, let me go ahead and invite our other speakers and panelists to go ahead and turn on your video, and we will start with our panel discussion. And hopefully we'll leave some time to allow some of our candidates to ask some questions live as well. So I've got a few questions queued up. So let me stop my screen sharing here. We'll focus on our speakers. And let me kick off the first question to Dr. Martin, but I would love for anyone else on the panel to chime in on this question as well, because obviously these events are focused on attracting diversity, right? And so we have a large contingency of African-American professionals, Black professionals, and Latinx professionals as well that have joined us. And they may like the idea of the opportunities at Intel, but they want to know, what is it like to be a minority or a person of color working at Intel? So this first question is, do you feel that you can be yourself culturally speaking as a minority or person of color at Intel? So I'll default this to Dr. Martin, but would love for other folks to chime in.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with a little bit of a disclaimer. As a guy who just turned 50, I was raised with certain things, right? So my father would not allow me, for example, to have an earring in my ear. So the idea that I would have braids or something of that nature is kind of foreign for me. So for me, I think it's just, being true to myself and maybe how I was raised and understanding that, but also those expectations that were kind of put before me through my elders, right? They said, hey, when you go into a workplace, you need to behave this way. I still carry a lot of that with me. Some of the younger generations, the guys and the ladies who are recently and more coming into the job market today, they don't necessarily see things the same way. So I see guys that have, I don't even want to call just hair everywhere. I don't quite know what to do with that personally, but I try to take it for what it is and work with them where they are and try to make sure that I'm really focused on the work and not, their hair, for example. Can you do that? I say, yes, you can, but you must also accept that it does come with consequences, because there are guys older than me that are still inside the company, right? I'm not an elder inside the company. I've been at Intel 17 years. My bosses have typically been at Intel 36 years. So now we're talking about individuals who are 60 plus years old, right? So they may not necessarily understand dreadlocks. They may not necessarily understand a tattoo on the face if that's how you choose to bring your full self to work. That doesn't say you can't come to work that way. But I think as the person coming, you also have to be mindful of those you're interacting with and meet them halfway, because we're all kind of navigating and learning. This is a new space. I think as the work environment is changing over the years and with the newer generations coming in.
Would love to invite anyone else to add if anyone else would like to share any experiences. Cool. All right. So let me ask this next question to Sadiq. And this question is pretty basic, but I know you're in management. So how can candidates best come prepared for an interview at Intel?
That's a great question, and something that I'm very passionate about as a hiring manager, because usually I screen the candidates and then I advance them on for the panel interviews. And in these past few months, I've spent a lot of time collating the feedback and reading through the feedback for candidates and providing feedback for candidates who are not successful. And one of the consistent themes in reading the feedback of people who are not successful is very much related to what Carmen mentioned, right, about preparation. Really, during the interviews, people want to understand what you have done in your past experience. The interviews are all about yourself. They will look at your resume and they will ask you or invite you to talk about the technical achievements, the personal achievements, the work that you've done, work that demonstrates teamwork, demonstrates curiosity, being able to address conflicts, and also thrive in environments where there's ambiguity. My feedback to candidates is always to prepare and really reflect on their experiences, really use a very structured approach to explain your specific contributions, especially if you worked in a group environment on the particular accomplishments, so that the interviewer understands what you did or what you brought to the table. It's very commonplace for people to oversimplify or generalize what they did because it's very second nature. You did that activity, so it's very simple to you. But a lot of people don't really know, maybe what you're talking about or that technical background. And so, really, there isn't any trick question. There are no trick questions or specific tests that we use to trap any candidate. It really comes down to you. So spend some time, reflect on your resume, understand your technical contributions, be able to cite specific examples when you are asked about your strengths or your weaknesses, and also really try to engage the interviewer and ask them about themselves. People at Intel have worn various hats. They have been in different groups. So as you heard from our panelists, we've all been in different roles in our tenure at Intel. So engage them and understand where they are coming from, because ultimately, the handshake must be both ways. We want to understand if you're a fit for us, but you also want to understand if the team is a fit for you, right? And it's through that inquiry and that discussion, while you are expressing or demonstrating your technical strengths and also your interpersonal skills, is how that match is going to be made. So really spend that time to really understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your contributions, your achievements that are well chronicled in your resume, and be able to systematically explain what you did during the interviews. And that's really what is going to make you successful and a standout.
Awesome advice. I appreciate that. So
Can I add one thing to that?
Please
I'd
do.
also suggest that you, as best you can, be able to quantify, right? So Intel is a huge data company, right? We love numbers. So you can say, hey, I've been a great connector of people across different organizations.
Mhm.
Okay, what does that mean?
Right.
Now, if that turns into, hey, I've been able to, build connections and grow a network that spans 6 different organizations and includes 250 people across 4 business groups, that's a different conversation than, hey, I'm a good connector, right?
Right.
So try to quantify your impact in the statements that you're using to describe yourself.
And that ties right into preparation. So awesome insight.
Yeah, I would have to say, if you quantify, sometimes it's good to have those numbers on your resume too, because then that kind of like really stands out in front of all of the words. And then to go off of what Sadiq was saying, there's also this method called the STAR method. So that's what helped me in interviews, where you go over the situation, which is the S in STAR, task, action, and results. And if you use that method every time in your interviews, you can, in all the situations in your resumes, it explains kind of like what your impact was on those different tasks. So.
Crush the interview.
I want to add one more thing too, and I'm glad Jade talked about the resume. Make sure you're able to talk to what's in the resume. So I've had some situations where people wrote something and then couldn't talk to it. So just make sure whatever you have in there, you are able to talk and articulate what you did.
Awesome. So I'm going to continue with my questions, but I want to make sure to leave some time for our candidates to ask questions as well. So to our candidates, if you would like to ask a question on video, utilize in Zoom, there's a feature called reactions. And if you click on reactions, you can raise your hand, you can turn on your video, and then I'll call on you to ask that question, and then I'll unmute you so that you can ask the question. So if you have a question, you'd like to get that question answered, feel free to turn on your video and raise your hand, and then I'll call on you as soon as I can. All right, so the next question I have is about mentoring. So I'm going to leave this one open because I'm not sure, who on the team may have taken advantage of mentoring or being a mentor or being a mentee. So my question is mentoring part of Intel's culture, and is it easy to access a mentor within Intel? So I'll open that one up.
I'm going to ask the young people to go first. I've been around a long time. So.
I would say yes, it is. What Intel does. I was actually having a conversation with my manager today on, who's going to be my mentor, and all like the different, areas where I can have mentors. So it's definitely something that Intel drives, because we drive to, grow the employees and learn from just all the different aspects. So that's my my thing. And I've only started this role for like a month and a half. So we're already having that conversation now.
Awesome. Awesome. So I see we have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Carmen.
And actually, so Intel does have like an official like mentor program you can apply, and I've actually used it where I had someone, I linked up with someone who could help look at my resume and help those different things too. So there's an official program, and then also you can just ask people. I have people ask, I mentor people, and people just ask me and said, hey, I know Carmen has a skill set in this, would you like to be, would you like to mentor me? So there's informal and formal, but that is part of the culture of Intel.
So let me ask the next question, and that is, and for everyone else that has their hand up, we're sort of running out of time. So if you want to drop your question in the chat, I'll do you the favor of trying to ask that question in a rapid format. So please drop that question in the chat, and then I'll do my best to ask it of the panelists. But in the meantime, while you drop those questions in the chat, let me ask this question about employee resource groups. So does Intel have employee resource groups, and have any of you taken advantage of being a part of them and what they have to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned NIA early on is one of the employee resource groups specifically for the African ancestry population inside of Intel. But there's also the Native American, the Christian believers, uh, iGlobe, the LGBTQ community, disabled veterans. Almost any demographic you look for, there's an employee resource group internally that is supported by the company, has regular meetings, and work on behalf of their demographic to help them succeed and thrive inside of Intel's walls. So I've used NIA. Yes. Is it perfect? No, of course, everybody has their own things they wish were different or better. But it is there, and I think it is a valuable resource for everyone, whether you're from Intel or for African ancestry or not. They're open to anyone. They're just labeled as such so that they're easier to find, right? So it'd be a little difficult as a Black person to find the group if it was called, Purple People Leaders or something.
And I also use NIA and other employee groups as well. And one thing that I want to explain it, sometimes some of the employee resource groups have conferences. So have you ever been to like a SWE or a NSBE where you have development opportunities? Sometimes the employee resource groups will hold these conferences where you can develop and have some development opportunities in there as well as networking with other Intel employees. And I've used that as well.
Awesome. So a question that comes up a lot, especially with companies that are related to technology, and that is around work-life balance. So what is work-life balance like working for Intel? And if anyone can kind of talk about their experiences of how they manage work-life balance working at Intel.
I'm going to ask the young person to go first.
Jade.
Yes, so I have a lot that I do. So I work full time. I'm in school, I guess part time, and then of course I have like my afternoon activities as far as my recreational sports. As far as work-life balance, I think I manage it pretty well. And I think Intel also, and my manager also supports, if you feel like you're overworking yourself, let's step back a little bit and, kind of figure out like what's going on. But I think I'm different just because I have, the extra things that I do, but I believe I manage it well. I'm not stressed or anything. Just because I know how to manage my time. Yeah. And then I still have a social life too outside of work. So I think, I have a good balance.
Okay, so I want to do a last rapid fire question, right? For each one of our panelists really quickly, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jacetta at Intel to talk about next steps. But before we get into the next steps, just really quickly from each of you, any advice that you have for our candidates as they consider career opportunities with Intel? And I'll start with you, Dr. Martin.
I think I'll reiterate what we mentioned earlier around being able to articulate what you have done, being able to really highlight the value in terms of the work that you've done, and speaking to what's on your resume. There was a thread from someone who's a PhD and they're thinking, hey, I'm having a hard time because I have a PhD. Some of that is maybe if the role, right? So if the role is a factory role, and if I'm hiring for a factory job, when the last PhD I hired, I met with her probably 6 times, and I tried to convince her not to take the job. But what I was really trying to articulate to her is, this is not a PhD research job. This is an operational job. This is a factory support job. And I really want you to be clear on what the role is. So for the individual going into the role, and maybe their PhD looks like I'm a fundamental foundational research guy, work on being able to articulate how your research gets applied, right? So how does your work, however blue sky it is, how does it come into fruition? Or what ideas do you have that would bring it into that space? And articulate that you are interested in seeing and doing that work, because that's the kind of friction that you'll have to navigate depending on the job role. Now, if you're going into a blue sky space, Now you want to do maybe the opposite, right? Hey, I've got 1,000 blue sky ideas, and I need to get them to a point that I can hand off to someone that's going to take it to completion and production. So be clear on where you are and articulate the value you have, but try to learn a bit about the role you're interviewing for as well, so you can speak to it in that context and help the manager connect you to the role that they're actually looking to fill.
Awesome advice. Carmen, any advice you would offer for our candidates?
Along the lines of that, especially interview prep, I would say also, don't be afraid to apply to something, even if you may not have all the specific things in there, you probably have transferable skills and be able to talk about that. So you may say you have maybe you want to do project management, but you've been an engineer for a long time, be able to talk to your transferable skills that you did from one job to another job. So be prepared for that. And I think also, when you're applying, like Dr. Martin mentioned, understand the role, ask questions about that role. And make sure and at the end, ask a question, as you're interviewing us and we're interviewing you. So be prepared to ask those questions. That's what I recommend.
Thanks, Carmen. Jade, would you, what would be your advice for candidates?
My advice would be, like what Dr. Martin and Carmen said, understand what the role is and get all your questions out during that interview, because you want to know, the culture that you're going to go into, the job that you're going to go into. So make sure you understand that, and the interviewer will also understand that you're passionate when you ask those questions, and that you understand that they understand that you're passionate.
Okay. Excellent. Next, Sadiq, what will be your last advice to our candidates?
I think everybody has said it all, but I will add that Intel is a values-based company. We really value we're all about our values. We care about continuous growth, learning. We care about collaboration. We care about teamwork. So in addition to preparing for your technical skills for your interview, really understand that during the interviews, we will be looking to see how you're able to thrive in a team environment, how you're able to resolve conflicts, how you're able to learn and grow. So really understand the Intel values and make sure that you are able to connect to them during the interview, because that's something that is going to be front and center in making our decision for next steps for you.
Awesome. So to all of our panelists, let me thank you for agreeing to be on our panel discussion, for bringing your experiences and sharing those experiences with our candidates. So in this next portion of our event, let me introduce Josetta Morales, HR business partner at Intel, to talk about next steps if you'd like to interview.
Thanks, Will. All right, so hi everyone. As Will said, my name's Josetta Morales. I'm an HR business partner in the Technology Development Group. I want to quickly say thank you to HBCU Connect for supporting this event and for all of the participants for joining us today. Okay, so for next steps, thank you to everyone who's already submitted your resumes. We will be getting those in front of our technology development managers shortly after this event. And if you haven't already done so, we encourage you to fill out our talent form. So if you could go to the next screen, Will. You can use your phone to scan the QR code here. We can also drop the link in our chat. So what the talent form does is it allows you to upload your resume and build a profile, which puts you in Intel's database, and that makes your information visible to the recruiting teams across Intel. We also encourage you to visit jobs.intel.com. There you can do a keyword search to find open roles that you're interested in. And we're hiring at all levels, from interns, college grads, entry level, all the way through to experienced. And then lastly, I encourage you to stay connected with us on social media to stay up to date on all of the exciting things that are happening at Intel. So I hope everyone enjoyed the event and learned something new about Intel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Josetta. So usually what I like to do to close out is I like to do two things. I like to ask everyone to turn on their video so that I can get a screenshot of all of your smiling faces to remember the event. And then I like to ask our keynote to take us out with any final words of encouragement for our candidates. So Dr. Osborne, if you'd like to close us out.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having the event. Thank you all for coming in and joining us today. And my only, well, maybe not my only, what I will remind all of you of is to be confident in your own excellence. You are excellent. This is why you're here. We need you. We want you. take the leap of faith, reach out to us, we'll reach back. Hopefully we can make a connection that works for both of us, and we can all move forward and be successful together. But thank you for coming up.
Thank you. So thanks for being our keynote, Dr. Osborne, and thanks to our panelists, thanks to the entire Intel team, and to our candidates. Thank you all. We cannot do these events without you. We had a great turnout, and we had some great questions and engagement. So thank you all for that. But please remember, these are real opportunities. When Intel asked me for the resumes of all of the candidates from our event, I send over the resumes, and we sometimes go back and forth to make sure I'm sending all of the, the right format. They are looking at the resumes, and they are making decisions from those resumes that they see. So these are real opportunities. Like I said previously, we've had events with Intel in person prior to COVID, and a lot of people got hired from those events. So you may, and even if you don't hear something right away, just like Dr. Martin mentioned earlier, it could take a while, but you still may hear something from Intel. So make sure we have your latest resume by going to hbcuconnect.com/intel-mfg for manufacturing. I'll drop that in the link, but I'll also email everyone as well. So if everybody wants to say cheese, let me go ahead and get this snapshot of all of our smiling faces. Let me lower these hands so these can drop off. And then we'll get this screenshot going. So everyone say cheese. And thank you all. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Appreciate it. And look for our follow-up email and make sure we have your latest resume. We will share that with Intel. So thanks again. Everyone take care. Hey, Reg, are you still here?
Yes, sir, I am.
You didn't get to say your favorite line. Sorry, man.
It's all right. I'm fine.
What's the line? It's not too late.
His favorite line is to tell me to turn my slides off before I do the photos. All right, you guys take care.
All right,
Thanks,
bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.